Good afternoon, good evening, good night, where in the world. Welcome to Carers World Radio Plus, bringing you the General Election 2017 as it happens. We're featuring the North Norfolk. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute, but it's a very interesting national picture emerging. I'm loath to talk about polls because mostly they tend to be wrong, but it's very interesting that the BBC's exit poll suggests that the Conservatives will not end up with an overall situation will develop over the night. No seats are declared yet. And indeed, while some are racing to declare any minute now, in fact, I think the very first seat in Newcastle Central is about to declare. We'll see that a little bit later. However, here in North Norfolk, we've got a bit of a wait because the returning officer's predicting 5 a.m. as the declaration for this here. Now, just a little bit of the background, Norfolk. In the last election, for the Liberal Dem elected with a majority of just over 4,000. In second place was Anne Stewart for the Conservatives. In third place was Mike Baker from UKIP. Denise Burt from Labour was in fourth, and Phil Gate of the Greens was last. Well, interestingly, this time, both UKIP and the Greens have stood aside. We'll hear a little bit more about that in the programme, their reasons for doing so.
And that's why I want to be the MP here, to get a better deal for North Norfolk, to make it a better place to work and live. I also supported Brexit, which is one of the key issues at this election, and who's best placed to negotiate the Brexit deal. I think the experience I have, having spent the last 4 years working at the heart of government in the Ministry of Defence, in the Department for Business and Department for Energy, is that I understand how government works, so I can use my knowledge and experience to help get a better deal for the people of North Norfolk, so that we can get more affordable homes here, so that we can get more good school places, and so we can get the resources going into the NHS, so that people get the support and care that they need in this constituency. So that's why I'm standing. It's personal for me. I'm local. I really want to make a difference here, and I want to get on and deliver Brexit.
And that was, in fact, James Wild, the Conservative candidate here in North Norfolk, giving you his 1-minute CV on why he should be elected. North Norfolk is a constituency on the sea. It spreads across like umbrella east of Norwich on the big bulge that is East Anglia to get it. It's not very technical, so that's what it is. Anyway, the other two contenders in the seat are Labour and the Liberal Democrats. Next, we hear from Stephen Burke for Labour.
I'm the only candidate to live and work in North Norfolk. I'm on the board of the North Norfolk Clinical Commissioning Group and on the board of Victory Housing and on the board of Age UK Norfolk. So I'm very involved in trying to improve health, housing and care in North Norfolk, particularly for our ageing population. We have one of the oldest populations in the country, and we need to improve health and care and support in North Norfolk. I'm also interested in improving coastal defences here and finding ways to encourage young people to stay in North Norfolk by creating high-tech and green jobs, as well as jobs in care and housing and health. My previous experience has been running national care charities, a childcare charity and a charity supporting older people and their carers and families, and I was leader of Hammersmith and Fulham Council and a councillor there for 12 years, and I'm very much involved in trying to improve health and care across the whole of London with other London boroughs. So my experience is very much focused on improving health and care for people who need those services, and involving carers and their families in making that happen.
That's Stephen Burke, who's the Labour candidate in North Norfolk, where I am now, and the count, as you see, going on behind me, the ballot box has been arriving. Norfolk is is true countryside, so there's lots of winding lanes, so it takes some time for all of the ballot boxes to arrive. And the count staff here tell me that the last box is not likely to arrive till perhaps midnight. So it's a good hour and a half, hour and 3/4 for all of the boxes to arrive. And that's in part why the declaration is unlikely to be until about 5 o'clock. Anyway, moving on to the third candidate in this North Norfolk constituency, and that's the sitting MP Norman Lamb. Here's his 1-minute CV on why he should be re-elected.
Hello, I'm Norman Lamb and I'm the Liberal Democrat candidate in the North Norfolk constituency. I've been the MP here for the last 16 years. Before that I was a lawyer, an employment lawyer, partner in a law firm. But while I've been in Parliament, I've focused particularly on health and care issues. I've been the party's health spokesperson for many years now, and during the coalition I was the minister responsible for care, and in particular mental health, but also care for elderly and disabled people. And this is a subject that is a passion of mine. I think we let too many people down in this country, and I think there's a real danger that if we elect the Conservatives with a big majority and we end up with a one-party state, then people will be taken for granted. I want to stay in Parliament to hold them to account on ensuring that the NHS has enough resources and that care for elderly and disabled people is also properly supported, together with support for carers.
Norman Lamb, the Liberal Democrat, bidding to a seat here in North Norfolk, which is, apart from Clive Owen in Norwich, a sea of Conservative seats in East Anglia. So Norman Lamb hoping to hang on to his majority of 4,000, or conceivably, possibly, increase it. But we will see, obviously, as the night goes on. Now, the staff here tell us that last year, the total number of people registered to vote was 68,867. And they issued 49,558 ballot papers. The turnout last time was shade under 72%. Now, the actual electorate has increased, so there's more registrations in the constituency this time, up by approximately 1,800 to 69,263. We'll obviously hear about turnout when the result is declared, which, as I said before, if you've just joined us, is probably not going to be till 5 a.m. Just keeping an eye on the national picture for you, anybody who's involved in the health and social care fields, we'll be seeing, obviously, if Jeremy Hunt is re-elected in Surrey. We'll be seeing if Clive Betts, the chair of the House Select Committee in local government, is re-elected in Sheffield South East. But we do know that one of the first results in was held by Labour. So early days yet. Now, across this county, if you were to actually look at a map, it looks like quite a small area. In fact, there are 104 polling stations, and also to add into everything tonight, included in the count, is the postal votes, and there's 11,800 of those. So it's going to be very interesting. It was a reasonably high, a pretty good turnout last time. Let's see if it's even higher this time. You've heard the 1-minute CVs of the candidates. Now we're going to concentrate in a little more detail on what they had to tell me when I interviewed. First of all, I met James Wilde, the Conservative candidate bidding in North.
So in our manifesto, we've set out plans to put an extra £8 billion into the NHS over the next 5 years. So the budget by 2022-23 will be £8 billion higher than it is now. That's a credible plan. It's an affordable plan. So we're putting more resources in, and that will benefit North Norfolk, and I'll be fighting as the local MP, if elected, to make sure that we get the services that we need here. What we've seen from the other parties is uncosted plans from the Labour Party, and obviously the Liberal Democrats won't be forming the government. So it's a choice between a credible costed plan for extra £8 billion a year, or Jeremy Corbyn's plan, which the IFS said yesterday would raise taxes to levels not seen since the Second World War.
There was also concern expressed that the Conservative plans weren't viable either.
Well, I think we've shown over the last Parliament that we said we'd put in more money, and we have done. And we've got a costed plan to deliver that. So there will be more money going in, and we need to make sure we're using that money most effectively. So there is productivity improvements that are needed in the NHS. It's a big organisation. People talk about the layers of management and bureaucracy. So it's about getting the best value for every pound that we put in.
Nobody doubts the quality and commitment of NHS staff. Yet, are you in effect saying that the staff are wrong in what they say, that the service is starved of money?
Well, the facts are there's more money going in. Everyone would always like more money, but there isn't a magic money tree. There's no bottomless pit here. So it's about getting better value for money. So there are practices and things that could be changed, and actually the staff are best placed to deliver those efficiency and productivity improvements so that people get the health care that they need.
And in terms of social care, because that is really the key issue that our audience particularly feel angry and frustrated about, if you like. Perhaps you could explain exactly what the Conservative proposal is on social care, because there seems to be a bit of confusion in the earlier days of campaigning.
Yes, very happy to. It's a very important area that people don't misunderstand. So the current situation is that if you've got assets of more than £23,000, then you have to pay for your social care, and that's the only level that's protected. What we're going to do is increase the level of protected assets to £100,000, so that won't be wiped out. No one will have to sell their home to pay for care while they're alive, and also we're going to introduce a cap on the level of fees that people have to pay as well. So these are complicated areas. That's our principles of what we want to do. There'll be full consultation on this and legislation before this comes into effect in 2020. So there's a long time to go to get the detail right, but the principle is we're increasing fourfold the level of assets that are protected for people, and we'll put a cap on the care costs that people have to pay.
You said won't have to sell the house, the family home in the current generation effectively, that it's effectively a deferred situation. Firstly, that assumes obviously they're going to have to sell their house, and secondly, that's storing up surely problems for the next generation in terms of inheritance, which has been a fundamental principle of Conservative policy.
Yes, I mean, obviously there's inheritance tax thresholds which will apply in the usual way, but there will be a cap on the costs that people have to pay. So deferred agreements already exist. It's a mechanism that's there for people, so they don't have to worry about moving out of the house. That's left to be sorted out in the future. But it's right that people do make a contribution to their care costs, but we're going to be putting a cap on that so that people who have saved and worked hard don't lose all their assets. They can pass them on to their family and future generations. But our view is that it's right that people make a contribution rather than having the younger generation who are already paying a big tax burden, having more tax put on them. So it's about striking that balance.
And we've been, a number of our viewers have contacted us, having heard about this principle of effectively deferring it to the next generation, and very worried that their son or daughter will not have a home to move into, that they'll effectively could be homeless or in really substandard accommodation when they worked hard to try and stop that happening and give their son or daughter a good future.
Well, what we're saying is we'll guarantee that £100,000 of assets will be protected. Which is not the case at the moment. It's £23,000. So people in that situation will be able to leave more, and then there will be a cap on the costs in any event, so that it will depend on the value of the house as to whether that does actually need to be sold or whether they've got other assets that could fund it before it being passed on to the next generation.
Now, on page 63 of the Conservative manifesto, it says, and I quote, "It is wrong to pass on to future generations a bill you cannot or will not pay yourself." You've breached your own principle, haven't you, by saying that it's deferred to the next generation?
Well, this is about people who've got assets and need care. It's right that they do make a contribution, but we don't want people to have to dispose of their house or at that time, so they don't have to worry about it. So it's about people paying for their generation. They'll still be able to pass on assets to future generations.
But you're still deferring the payment, and that's against you. It says in the manifesto, it is wrong. So in effect, you're doing something which your own manifesto says is wrong.
No, I don't think that's right. I think what we're talking about is a deferred payment is still a set payment that someone's making. It's not being passed on to the future generation. The future generation will get £100,000 of protected assets if someone is in the fortunate position, having worked hard, to be able to pass that on.
That's James Wild, who's the Conservative candidate here in North Norfolk, bidding to overturn a 4,000 majority from the Liberal Democrats, Norman Lamb. We'll be hearing from Norman Lamb a little later on in the programme. But let me first say to you, welcome if you've just joined us on Carers World Radio Plus. We're having one or two technical issues at the moment with viewing us through our website. So we'll sort out a formula for you to look through YouTube directly at the broadcast. But welcome. Good to see you're chatting away in the chat room. That's one way to have your say this evening on General Election 2017, special from Carers World Radio Plus. Some of the comments, interesting stuff. Oh, Rosemary says we're live now. Oh, excellent. So I think the technical problem may have sorted itself out. So thank you for that. Some interesting comments. I think this is a comment on politics from Nesta. In the sky. Where are we? and she disappeared off my screen. Something about circuses and Queen's speeches and things like that. Anyway, I'm sure. Well, let's see if I can go. No, it doesn't want me to see that. It just says Queen's speech. Then, oh well, keep up the good work. There's a suggestion that I might be tapping into a certain beer. By the way, I deny all knowledge. I have a bottle of water here, so I'm afraid that's it. Sorry to ruin the enjoyment. Anyway, ways to get in touch with us. You can email us, news@carersworldradio.com, news@carersworldradio.com. You can us on Twitter and direct message us, or you can talk to us, of course, in the chat room. Well, the scene behind me is the count here at North Norfolk. If you've just joined us, the boxes are still arriving. It's a very countrified constituency, if you like, so it takes some time for ballot boxes to be physically brought here in vans and by all means of transport. But they are counting away, but the declaration in this constituency is unlikely to be until 5 a.m. But we'll keep you posted with that. It looks like nationally, Labour have held another seat in Houghton and Sunderland, so that seems to be 2 seats at the moment. Early declaration, some places do it. Here they take their time because of the nature of the county itself, itself. So going for the Conservatives a few minutes ago. Now let's turn to the Labour Party and to Stephen Burke, this time standing for the party. Last time it was his wife Denise who stood for the party. Here's Stephen talking to me about carers issues to start with.
Well, I think obviously we need to improve health and care services and support for carers in North Norfolk. We have one of the oldest populations in the country. More people are requiring care and support, and we need to ensure we have the resources to do that. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is by having a Labour government investing in the National Health Service and the social care system. Labour has promised to invest an additional £37 billion in the next government into the NHS and a further £8 billion into the care system. And I think that will make a big difference, but it's only a start. What Labour is also looking at is setting up a national care service, which obviously carers will be very heavily involved with and supported by. And that national care service needs to be integrated with the NHS so that we have a whole system which puts people, whether they're older people, disabled people, and their carers, family carers, at the heart of the system.
One of the things that our audience have been talking about is more a situation rather than heroically giving care unpaid, is actually being paid, supported and trained, and they argue that this would put them in a better position to provide better care and also actually would save the state money in the longer term. How much of that could be done, for example, with this National Care Service?
Well, I think the National Care Service has to listen to carers and has to involve carers and engage carers from the very beginning in developing the plans for a National Care Service. The system in this country would collapse, as we know, without the involvement of family carers. I think the latest figures are something like £130 billion worth of care being provided by family carers. So, that's the starting point. But things could be much better if we properly supported carers. And I think one of the ways, as you suggest, is by training carers, but also enabling them to earn an income through their caring responsibilities. But there are many other ways which I think we can do that, whether it's through better advice and information on the one hand, enabling carers to work, and particularly through flexible employment, and ensuring that carers get that kind of emergency support when there is a crisis, and good respite care as well.
One of the criticisms that's often levelled at the Labour Party is you haven't costed your proposals. Well, this time there is a costing document alongside the manifesto. How confident are you that if Labour was elected to power, that you'd be able to fulfil these sorts of promises in the manifesto, like the National Care Service?
I'm extremely confident about it. I think the manifesto is very exciting, and as you say, the manifesto is fully costed. We're a rich country here, about the 5th richest nation in the world. We should be able to afford a decent health and care system. Labour's going to do it by ensuring that we don't actually raise taxes for 95% of people on low and middle incomes. What we'll be doing is ensuring that the richest individuals and the rich corporations in this country actually pay their fair share of tax and cut down on tax avoidance and evasion as well.
In terms of social care, that's probably the issue that's most our listeners are most concerned about, and obviously it's for the Conservatives to explain their manifesto promise in relation to social care funding. But what sort of view do you bring to it?
I mean, I think the Tories have started in the wrong place. Actually, what we need is a new vision for social care in the country. The Tories have actually gone to how are we going to help people pay for care, or how are we going to shift the burden of paying for care onto individuals. What we need to see is a new care system altogether. And once we've worked out how that might work, then we could actually look at how that's funded. I would like to see it funded through taxation. That's still the fairest way of raising money in this country, and it'd be a much fairer way of doing it than putting the onus onto individuals who happen to be unfortunate enough to, for instance, have dementia.
So you'd be looking perhaps for parity of esteem between the way NHS patients are dealt with and the way people in the social care system are dealt with.
If we're going to achieve true integration of health and care, then we have to achieve integration of the funding of health and care. And the only way we can do that properly is to move away from two different systems of funding, one of which is means tested and one of which is through taxation and free at the point of need, into one system. And I would like to see that the NHS system applying to both health and social care. That's a long-term aim, and clearly that's something that the National Care Service would need to work towards.
That's Stephen Burke, who's standing for the Labour Party in this constituency of North Norfolk. Now, we see the time is coming at 11:30 and the box is leaving. So their target arrival for all of the boxes to be in the counting is midnight. So we've possibly got about another half hour to go. Now, this seat of North Norfolk has been held since 2001 by Norman Lamb for the Liberal Democrats. He currently has a majority of just over 4,000. So it's not the most marginal of seats. In fact, in a table of marginal seats in the country, it's number 41. So it's not most marginal, but, you know, what's marginal these days, especially if the polls are to be believed going all over the place. But anyway, so we've heard from James Wild for the Conservatives, we've heard Stephen Burke for Labour. Now let's turn to the man hoping to retain this seat at Norfolk, Norman Lamb for the Liberal Democrats. And first of all, I asked him why the carers strategy appears to have disappeared.
This is the problem when there is one party that has total control and there's no other voice in Parliament that is there to hold them to account. Carers are too often ignored. They should be part of the team, working alongside the general practitioner, the district nurse and so on. But fundamentally, I think the really important thing that people have to recognise is that we won't get a good deal for carers, and indeed for the people they're caring for, unless we invest more in the NHS and in care. And that's why the Lib Dems have come forward with the case for putting a penny on income tax, which would raise £6 billion a year, which would provide vital extra resources both for the NHS but also for care. And unless we make that necessary investment, I think people will be badly let down. And the Lib Dems, I think, are the only party with a clearly costed plan to demonstrate how the extra money can be found for the NHS and the care system.
The Labour Party has suggested, in effect, a national care service. Indeed, they've used that phrase. Do you feel that perhaps is the answer?
Well, it depends what they mean by that. It begs a lot of questions. I don't want a sort of takeover by the NHS because a lot of people say that if care services locally were sort of run from Whitehall, we could end up in a worse situation. What I want to see instead is a complete joining together, an integration of health and social care. It's ridiculous, actually, if you think about it for more than a moment, that we have two separate systems, a health system and a care system running side by side, one free, one means tested. The Conservative proposals make the divide even worse. So instead of that, we need to be bringing the two together. As a long-term plan, the Lib Dems are saying we should have a dedicated NHS and care tax shown on your pay packet, and it would be informed by an independent assessment of how much the NHS and the care system needed, and then political parties would say whether they were prepared to meet that assessment of need.
You've campaigned yourself, based on your family experience, on the issues of mental health. Where do you see this going? Because there seems to be an awful lot of talk about it, and if you're elected, how could this talk be put into action?
Well, what frustrates me a lot is the gap, in a way, between the rhetoric and the reality. So we legislated in the coalition for what we call parity of esteem, equality between physical health and mental health. But we're a million miles away from achieving that. And the thing that I felt most strongly about, in a way, was that in the last decade, the Labour government rightly introduced maximum waiting times so that you didn't have to wait too long for an operation, for cancer treatment, and indeed in A&E departments. But they left out mental health. There were no maximum waiting time standards in mental health, and that meant that mental health was always disadvantaged. So I embarked on a plan to introduce the same right to get treatment on a timely basis in mental health as in physical health. We introduced the first maximum waiting time standards for early intervention in psychosis and for psychological therapies, but we now need to make them comprehensive so that everyone, including children and young people who have a mental ill health problem, get access to treatment on a timely basis. But the Tories haven't invested in it. And they accept it in principle, but they won't put the money behind it, so it won't happen. Now, because we're raising money through a penny on income tax, we can earmark £1 billion of that per year to invest in mental health for both children and young people and for adults, and you could make a massive difference with that money.
You clearly feel passionately about the issue of mental health. In terms of welfare, for example, as part of the coalition government, you've had to vote for, in effect, austerity. How do you square that with your own personal passion on the subject of mental health?
Well, there were often very difficult decisions to take in the coalition, and indeed I think we made some mistakes. But I would just make this point. When we went into power in 2010, we were faced with a deficit. In other words, the country was spending £160 billion a year more than we were bringing in taxes. And if you look around the world at the countries that haven't got to grips with their public finances, it's always actually the most vulnerable people who lose out the most. So I think we had to get public finances in order. That involved some difficult decisions. We had always to compromise with Conservatives. We stopped them doing a lot of things that I think would have been very bad. But, you know, on something like the bedroom tax, I think we made a mistake. I don't think we should have done that. We recognised that mistake and sought to change it, but the Tories wouldn't go along with that change. But I've also been chairing a commission on mental health for the West Midlands. And one of the things that we've secured funding for from government, £10 million, for a big trial of what's called independent IPS, independent personal support. And it's basically about helping people with mental ill health get back into work. And we know it works, but we haven't invested sufficiently in it. And I think if people are able to work and want to work, then we should help them to get back into work at the same time as protecting vulnerable people who are unable to work.
Much has been made of social care funding proposals by the Conservatives. Indeed, our audience, I would say, that's the subject that they're most interested in and feel most strongly about. How can you go ahead and protect, say, someone's inheritance?
Well, so the Conservative plan for elderly care, I think, is just completely ill thought through. It feels like a back of a fab packet. It's made people in this area both angry but also quite anxious, because the reality is that for many people who at the moment get care at home free or at a very low cost, they could be faced typically with £15,000 charges a year, and for people with complex needs it could be a lot more than that. And the cruel thing is that this is, you know, the lottery of life. None of us know who may be affected. I met a chap just this morning who's suffered a stroke. He's a working age man. His wife works in an NHS cottage hospital in North Norfolk, which is now under threat. They suddenly face a very worrying future. And if the care proposals that the Tories have put forward go ahead, they could lose most of their capital. And this idea of the £100,000 being protected, that's not even a legitimate claim, because it's only protected from care costs. But if you go into a care home, half of your costs are accommodation costs. I suspect, they haven't answered the question, but that will all come out of the £100,000, and so people could be left with far less than that. What we ought to be doing is pooling our risk, protecting all of us from the risk of catastrophic loss. And that's what the cap on care costs did. That's what Andrew Dilnot recommended to us. The Lib Dems negotiated to secure it in the coalition. We legislated for it, and now the Tories have abandoned it, which I think is absolutely shocking. And that's what we're campaigning to do. We will introduce the cap on care costs, and we will continue to put pressure on the government to do that.
At what level would you cap care costs?
Well, under the coalition, we said it would be at 72,000. Ideally, I would like it to be lower than that, but I think that's better than nothing, which is the Conservative position now. She's now said that they'll consult on some sort of cap, but we have no idea what that means. It could be 200,000, 300,000. We now know what their instincts are. We know what they plan to do. And all they're saying is they'll consult on it. Now, I know what public consultations are like. It often is a sort of fait accompli, and they go through the motions to demonstrate that they're listening, and then they do what they were planning to do in the first place.
Finally, one of the concerns that carers in our audience have raised over the past few weeks and months is feelings of guilt that they've fallen out of love with the person they're caring for, or fallen out of good feelings for the person they've cared for, and in some cases been criticised by professionals. Now, there's been a drive for some time from government to say people should be back into work. If you're re-elected and someone comes to your first constituency surgery and says to you, on Monday morning I've got to decide whether to take this job offer or not, what would you say to them?
Well, look, I think it has to be much more personal. I think a sort of one-size-fits-all approach can be very dangerous. There are many people who are out of work, who have disabilities and who have care needs, who may want to work and may be able to do some types of work, particularly if you make adjustments for them. And we ought to do far more to enable those people to work. And with work often goes dignity and self-respect and a sense that you're making a contribution. And we ought to do everything we can to enable those people to do that work. But we also must protect those who can't work. I have a particular concern. The Conservatives have recently changed the rules after a court ruling which disadvantages people with mental distress who need support in travelling. Now, they are literally discriminating against people with mental ill health as against people with physical health problems. So if someone came to see me in my advice surgery, I would do what I always do. I'd seek to address that particular individual's concerns, work with them to try and get the right solution for them. But you're up against a system nationally which too often is a blunt instrument, too often doesn't take individual circumstances into account.
That's Norman Lamb, who's hoping to hang on to this seat of North Norfolk this evening. He has a majority of just over 4,000. It's a swing of just over 4% required for the Conservatives to take this seat, which will put James Wilde in as the MP. But let's see how it. Ballot boxes are still arriving. The target time for all of the boxes to be in is midnight, so we've got about 15 minutes or so to go, and there's plenty of activity, which hopefully you can see behind me over the railing behind. Just let's pick up one or two of the comments in the chat room. Now I've worked out how to work this. This is Rosemary O'Neill. This is like being at a footy match. Thousands of referees giving an opinion before the result. Twitter suggesting May will be gone by lunchtime. So we've got, what else have we got here? So I'm not quite sure. There's a chain of conversation going on talking about him. I have no idea what outcome is going to be, but you can't take away Corbyn has had. Nesta joins in. His performance indicates the possible start of a new way. Rosemary replies, if only something like this had happened at the last election. Well, that's just a flavour of what's going on in our chat room at the moment. So you can contact us on Carers World Radio Plus by email also to news@carersworldradio.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and direct message as well as joining in the chat room. Well, hopefully, thanks to the power of technology, I have my first guest of the programme with me, joining us now, Professor Peter Beresford from Brunel University. And indeed, there we have him. Welcome, Peter. Okay, so what do you make of it so far, the campaigns and whatever you can make of these early stages this evening?
If the exit poll is accurate, or pretty accurate, then I feel this is of enormous importance to people as family members, as disabled people of all ages. I think it can at last offer a prospect, real prospect of hope for the future. Conversations I've been having with a welfare rights officer working in North who has been people their entitlements to benefits, people with dementia, family members supporting people with dementia, and it's really made me realise, having these conversations, that we have been so focused on how this is paid for, the future funding of social care, that we haven't really looked very carefully or added at what the realities are for people in 2017, either living with dementia or trying to support members of their family with dementia. There's talk now, which I think is very easy talk, of dementia-friendly communities. At the very same time, as we are seeing communities losing every kind of public service, public support system, where we are seeing social restricted more and more, a growing group of people get no support at all, though they have realised needs that they should be entitled.
Do you think the whole thing has become inhuman, effectively?
Oh, we have a appalling of care in England particularly. I mean, it seems to me so absolutely that we have what is the poor law. People don't realise. I carry out research both from a service user perspective and from a conventional academic perspective, and my research reflects the findings from all other research, including government research, that have no idea that social care is different to the NHS until it happens to them. People think that they will have the same entitlements to a universalist service, free at the point of delivery, as are the key underpinning principles of the NHS, which of course don't. And yet, because of change demographics of society, not just of older people, but of more disabled children and disabled families and families with disabled parents and so on and so forth, it means that more and more people need long-term support, and it's no longer the same balance in terms of the acute NHS services in relation to social care. Excuse me. So what it means is that this is marginalised because you get and needs to qualify for it. As in the UK, historically, NHS have an entitlement, and it's born. And I heard the Labour candidate for Norfolk talking about it. It's born by sharing the cost through general taxation.
It's funny you should mention. Rosemary O'Neill, who's in our chat room at the moment, wants to ask you what you think about increasing general taxation, which she says has never really been considered in regard to social care, etc. It's principles, it seems, that Labour, Liberal Democrats and other parties are talking about, more the general taxation approach. I think one expert called it spreading the risk. What do you think on that?
I think it is called, but you see, I think it's a false premise that's being raised on people here. And may I just say hello to Rose? And I'm not sure that's not the case for her. We don't need to raise the level of taxation. We need to move back to progressive taxation. As things are, as everyone says, if you're somebody who's an ordinary person with PAYE and all the rest of it, you inescapably pay your tax. And most, I think, feel quite comfortable about that, as long as they can see services and support coming back. We know the last number of years, I think all governments of all colours, have some responsibility, but particularly the present government, we've seen the people with the broadest shoulders, the wealthiest people, the wealthiest organisations and corporations paying less and less. We have a system structured to make at least tax avoidance, if not tax evasion, something that's routine. And it's not just that this is damaging the pool of tax, so that we have to taxes for ordinary people, but instead how things were. But it's also so damaging for the economy more generally. How can small businesses, which is so many people's aspiration, including disabled people, for example, how can small businesses survive on equal terms as the massive companies that any tax that are or that don't have to pay council tax, for example? It's just not on, and it's not a viable system for the future.
When you hear politicians say something which you know doesn't make sense, or it's just really a party political message, how do you get them to realise that this is real for a lot of people?
I think it's a really fundamental question. I think it's so interesting, isn't it, that older people who will most bear the burdens that are raised if dementia tax forward are the group identified as support of this manifesto and government, whereas younger people who have been penalised in many other ways have been the critics of that policy. All kinds of divisions are being created and have been created over a number of years between us as people who are in work or on benefits, although many people on benefits are in work, but we're presented as if that's not true, as people who are citizens or as refugees and asylum seekers, as people in the sector who get better conditions than people in the private sector, and of course as older and younger people. This is the politics of division as disabled people and non-disabled people. It's appalling and wicked, and it doesn't reflect what I think most of us still in this country think of as what's to be British. And I should say that half of my family came to this country as refugees from European attack, anti-Semitism. And this is a country which we had a wonderful tradition of actually valuing people who come, who are fleeing oppression, and that has really changed. And I feel really sad that the way that in relation to Brexit and in relation to this election, efforts have been made by the ruling party to raise the spectre of nastiness in relation to immigrants and refugees. And it's here, these divisions must be challenged.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Can I ask you one final question?
I hope we can have hope.
Oh no, absolutely. That would be good. That would be good. If that's is that essentially your message in a nutshell? That, yeah. Yes. Well, we'll see. Hopefully, we'll see how the night progresses. But I gather from our conversations before that your wife is very good at predicting the results of elections.
Unfortunately, she has to be.
So what's her prediction for tonight? Dare I stray into the sort of poll territory?
Well, her prediction for tonight until the exit poll was that Mrs. May would get the majority that she wanted.
Okay.
But we are both of us desperately hoping that the exit poll will be getting it right.
That's Professor Peter Beresford from Brunel University with his thoughts on the campaigns and the social care and health scenes at the moment. Certainly be talking to Peter again at another time. Now we're approaching midnight. If you've just joined us, you're listening to Carers World Radio Plus at the General Election 2017. We're looking keeping across the results from England, and we know that Labour held a third seat, so still early days yet. Here at North Norfolk behind me is the count going on in the North Norfolk constituency, which last time was held by the Liberal Democrat Norman Lamb. He's contesting the seat tonight, hoping to keep that against, his majority currently is just around 4,000. So last time there were 5 candidates in the field. Norman Lamb, the Lib Dem, came first. The Conservatives were second, but in third place was UKIP. In fourth place, Labour, and in fifth place, the Greens. Well, this time, UKIP and the Greens are not standing for different reasons in this constituency. So we're going to hear from both those parties now about that decision and also about their policies nationally. So first of all, we're going to look at UKIP, and I've been talking to Councillor Peter Reeves and Councillor Lisa Duffy from UKIP. Peter Reeves began by discussing the decision of UKIP not to stand in this constituency of North Norfolk.
We're a very different party to the old parties in that we don't trade ourselves on power for power's sake. We are here to make a real difference to this country, and so in some seats that is by winning the seat, but in others it's by stepping out and backing other candidates. That's what we've decided to do in North Norfolk for various different reasons. I personally think Norman Lamb is a fantastic MP, and in terms of carers and the health agenda, I don't think there's a better MP in Parliament.
So what are you saying to your supporters in the constituency? Back Norman Lamb?
As a party, we are backing the Conservative Party in that area for their stance on Brexit. So as a voter, if Brexit is important to you, it's important to us to hold the Prime Minister to account. And the Lib Dems are way off where the country is on that. But Norman Lamb, as an individual MP, is someone I could wholeheartedly support. So it depends on the issues that most matter to you. If it's Brexit, it's the Tories. If the health service matters to you, I think Norman Lamb is the man for you.
Okay, let's move more generally now on to UKIP. What is your party's policy in relation to health and social care? Because we've obviously started off on that point.
It is a complex issue, but UKIP has a very clear position on it. Whilst the Conservatives seem to be all over the place, not quite telling everybody what they intend to do, I think probably because the nasty Conservative Party are going to do what they normally do and hit the poorest and most vulnerable people really hard. UKIP is very clear though. We will take money out of the foreign aid budget, £11 billion that currently goes abroad. We will retain £3 billion of it in order to still do the most essential disaster relief. But of that 11 billion we'll take out of that spend sector, 2 billion will go into adult social care and 9 billion will go into the health service. UKIP is very clear and very consistent about where its priorities are. Our priorities are here in the UK, serving British people.
Lisa Duffy, as Foreign Affairs spokesperson for UKIP, what do you say to those people who will criticise the party for saying you really mustn't take away foreign aid? It's vitally important that we show to the world that we're a caring country.
Oh, absolutely, and we are a caring country, and UKIP are extremely caring. Not only do we care about abroad, but we care about home first. Hence why, as Pete's just said, what we want to do with the foreign aid budget. But actually what we want to do is to stop the 0.7% of GDP going to foreign aid. What we want to do is to bring it much more in line with 0.2%. That'll be between £3 to £4 billion. That brings us in line with the likes of America and actually would double what both Italy and Spain give together. So for us, it's about a balancing act. It's ensuring that they have clean water, inoculations, certainly for the children, and making sure there is enough money there for emergency aid. What we're not prepared to do is to be a handout of £35 a day where people in Pakistan can just go and get that money as a benefit when they're actually running a space programme. So it's about balancing things and making sure aid goes to those that need it. But equally, we have a crisis here at home in the NHS, within the care sector, and it's vital that we prioritise that, and I believe UKIP is the only party that's doing this properly and robustly.
One of the issues that's come to the fore, or perhaps one of the key questions this time, is funding, and all parties are being questioned on the subject of funding. How confident do you feel that UKIP's proposals on funding will be sufficient to give a good national health service and give a good social care service?
One of the great things about UKIP and its policies is we don't just say things because the polling drives you to say that thing because it's what the public wants to hear. We're a party that's prepared to say things that are needed to be said, whether the public wants to hear it or not. On our spending, we were the first party to have its manifesto fully costed, fully signed off, so there were no black holes. And we've already seen, even during this general election, the Conservative Party and the other parties make spending pledges that just don't stand up. UKIP isn't like that. We have costed every line of our manifesto because we have to, because we are under much more scrutiny than any other party. And so we're absolutely confident that our consistent policies that we've held for more than a decade without changing the values that are beneath them, unlike every other party who seems to U-turn every time you speak to them, UKIP is very consistent, very clear on its values, and we are absolutely confident that the spending pledges we make are absolutely thought through, and we are confident we can deliver them.
Aren't you inevitably going to have to raise council tax in order to help fund social care?
Absolutely not. It's a complete myth. Councillors here in Cambridgeshire, where I've been a county councillor, Conservatives, Labour and Lib Dems have got together to raise council tax every year in the name of trying to protect public services. And the reality is every penny of those tax rises over the last 5 or 10 years has gone into the coffers of the county council, building up their reserves. Not one penny of it has gone into actual frontline services. Now, that's not the same everywhere, so I won't tar every council with the same brush. But we in UKIP are the only party that is absolutely dedicated to low taxation, keeping money in your pockets, but delivering frontline services by reducing waste, reducing the bureaucracy that exists, and doing things in a more integrated way. And you can't get you can't get a picture that is less integrated than the health service and adult social care. One of UKIP's main priorities is to link up those services and deliver it properly, which is a complicated thing, but we think we've got the answers on how to deliver it, and we've got the dedication to make it happen.
Lisa, the Labour Party are talking about leading towards a national care service in their manifesto. Do you believe that's the answer to putting social care on a proper footing?
I think with social care, it's about the integration between all of the departments. So maybe a national care programme will work, but actually it's about joined up thinking between departments. And we know within the care service, we've got young people, old people, there's a whole host. So in terms of care, everybody is different, and so what we want to see is an integrated use of data so that can be shared amongst different community groups, and that there is a joined up thinking. So whether that works or not, I don't know if that's the right answer. What I will say is that we are very, very keen as a political party to make sure there's joined up thinking and there is money available. And certainly when we look at in terms of something such as mental health, that covers a vast variety of different issues, and there isn't a one size fits all, but it's making sure those services join up to make sure each person gets the right care for them.
And perhaps not just join up in the opinion of some. They say there should be parity between physical and mental health.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, mental health has been something that is now on the agenda, and I think that's primarily thanks to William and Kate, because they're bringing it to the forefront. But, everybody's lives, and I think they say 1 in 4 people have been touched at some point by mental health. And, it certainly happened for me personally, and I've said that in the past, after having my 4th child. So, everybody is touched in some way, and there are different levels of support. And mental health is so difficult because you can't see it. And it's very difficult for people to be able to identify it and see it as a problem. And we also want to do is to bring better training in our teachers, so that teachers can identify mental health issues as they occur in young children, because that's where younger children are becoming more and more vulnerable to those issues as our society is changing. So it's very important that at all level we make sure there is the right investment. So it's a big piece of work to do, but we as a political party are very, very keen to ensure this foreign aid budget is actually pushed into these different services within the care network.
Our audience, whom we've been speaking to intensively over the past 2 weeks, certainly since the election was called, are effectively saying they've all got all sorts of different ideas which appear on our website, but the essential thing seems to be that carers are saying carers should be paid, supported and trained, and in that way they can give better care to the person they care for and also save the country money. What's your take on that?
We are the one party, and if you read our manifesto, if you Google it, UKIP Manifesto 2017, you'll see we refer to this directly. We are the one party that genuinely believes that carers are the answer. The community is the answer to this problem. And we find it very frustrating that central government and the old political parties seem to see carers as a problem rather than the solution. And we believe investing in carers and carers networks is actually as worthwhile an investment, perhaps more worthwhile than infrastructure investments. It's good for the economy and it's good for people. And I say people because what the other parties tend to lose sight of is that it's real people, real families at the end of this process and funding streams. That's why UKIP won't means test carers. It won't means test disability benefits and benefits for the elderly. We're the only party that says the system of testing people is wrong and degrading, and we will put that right.
Finally, if a UKIP candidate is elected in a particular constituency, goes to his first or her first constituency surgery, and a carer comes in who's been unpaid up to that point, has got a job offer, but is being criticised by some professionals and by perhaps friends or relatives for putting herself or himself above others by accepting a work offer. What would you say that the candidate or the then elected UKIP member would say to that person? How would they advise them?
UKIP is a party that really does believe in people being able to make decisions for themselves. One of the problems in this country is we don't really value those who do care, and often they're a hidden person in the whole equation. People notice the patient or the client, people notice the service providers, and often it's a carer who's lost in the middle of all of this. So I would say absolutely, let's make sure that all of the service and support is in place, and that's entirely what we're all about, but carers have got to put themselves first as well.
And I think it's really important that they are given the support to be able to do that. What an awful position to be in, not being funded enough to be able to stay home and be that carer, but having to go out and get a job. So we need to be keeping the pressure on as a political party to stop that happening, but actually ensure that there is support there so that they can make the decision that's right for them and their family. And I think any caring MP would do the same.
And that's Lisa Duffy, Councillor Lisa Duffy and Councillor Peter Reid from UKIP. That has certainly caused a bit of a stir, their support for Norman Lamb in the course of this campaign. We'll see what effect that has this evening when it comes to the declaration, which we're anticipating could be as early, as late as 5 a.m. The staff here have in fact confirmed that they met their target at midnight to have all of the boxes from the polling stations across North Norfolk constituency in this sports hall behind me over here, and they're busily working away at that. Comment from the chat room, from Nesta in the chat room, not many night owls like us. Well, it's good to hear there are some night owls, saying UKIP only ones talking sense from our perspective. So there we are, you're listening to Carers World Radio Plus. The time is 4:15 midnight, and while Peter Beresford was happy to stay up, I'm hoping my next guest on the programme is happy, prepared to stay up. Now, due to be talking to Janice Clark, a carer from Surrey. Welcome, Janice.
Hi there. Hi.
No, it's
good to see
it's
you.
good to see. Good to see that you're up and about. So what have you made from a carer's perspective of the campaigns and what you've seen develop tonight so far, even though it's admittedly early days?
Well, first of all, I felt it was lovely to see Norman Lamb speaking, and I was quite impressed with Stephen Burke. I liked what I heard from both of those, but I have great admiration for Norman Lamb. I'm not talking politically necessarily, but I've watched him in Parliament over the years. I've have a feed to certain people in Parliament, and he's always been a factor of carers and also of mental health. And so, during his time in Parliament, weekly he would be asking very awkward questions of government about mental health issues. Many of the replies would be unsatisfactory because so little of the essential information that people need is collected nationally. It's all collected locally. So it's difficult to get a grasp, I think, of what actually is happening
I mean,
nationally. And I just wonder whether Department of Health is able to get a good view of what's happening nationally.
well, we'll see when the some of the key figures in health and social care. We'll see how they get on in their seats as the night develops. At the moment, we're early days with 6 Labour holds, 1 Conservative hold at the moment. So very early days yet. You and I have talked about carers issues for probably longer than either of us care to mention. Yet somehow I get the feeling that there's continues to be a lot of talk and not enough real action. To what extent do you believe that?
Well, yes, that's quite true. But I think what I found was quite disturbing from the recent, conversations, manifestos, election pledges about carers is that we're increasingly being seen just as a resource and not as people, individuals with our own lives and rights to choose about what we do and what we don't do. That is incredibly worrying because I know you've been asking that essential question, Paul. What would you say if a carer was offered a job and had to make a decision? Well, I wonder how many carers actually could make that decision to take that job. I mean, that's the reality, is that the system is increasingly relying on family members because of the cut of 25% or more in social care budgets. So unless there's proper commitment from whatever party is in government, or parties in government, if what we see is going to transpire, there is going to be, well, continue to be, just talk and no action.
One of our viewers, Tracy McGuinness from Ireland, has got from her own experience of caring for 2 disabled children, has some very strong views that carers really should be paid, supported and trained, and that in doing so it would enable individuals to give a better level of caring. She's not saying that people are, they are doing their best, but an even better level, but also save the state money. To what extent do you believe carers actually should be paid, supported and trained? Almost effectively, she describes as an equivalent to a nursing qualification.
Well, I believe the Care Act actually allows that to happen, that families, members, carers can actually receive some kind of payment in return for what they do. But of course, it is always a matter of choice. I think any carer you might talk to certainly would agree with having the skills to be able to care, because so many carers are just thrown in at the deep end. I mean, there are whole issues which you might want to go into about consent of the individual and confidentiality, which actually prevents, or appears to prevent, health professionals for sharing essential information with carers. So carers, quite often go home with the person being cared for who may have a mental illness, have a mental health issue, with absolutely no idea whatsoever about how to help them. Even most basic things about how to talk to them, medication, whole range of things. So training essentially has to be there. But of course, it also depends, I think, on the relationship. I could well understand a parent of, disabled children being very willing to take on that role. But so many people, I mean, our whole society is made up of potential carers. The MPs we're looking at tonight can be carers or potential carers. Our doctors, our consultants, our nurses, they're all carers. So unless we actually support them to be able to continue in their chosen employment, it's going to, our fabric of society crumble. So again, the relationship is the issue, because some relationships it doesn't bode well for
Well,
carers and
I
the
guess
person being cared.
I guess there's to a certain extent it's a little bit like the image of, and I'm probably going to get a huge response in the chat room now if I say this, but it's sort of like that there is an assumption in some quarters, for example, that once you get to pension age, you become somehow cuddly and, you know, it's hard to describe, sort of, friendly, jolly, cuddly, etc. But you're still a person. You're still the person you were when you were younger. And if you weren't like that, you're not going
Absolutely.
to suddenly mysteriously. So, how much is it, do you believe, that the people who make the decisions are not really taking the time to truly put themselves in the carer's position?
Oh, that's absolutely true. And going back to the point about, as you've done, I mean, you don't essentially change, and if there's a lot of talk about maintaining independence, and my relatives, my elders who I cared for over the years, were fiercely independent, which it was just wonderful because that is the essential part of life. It's what keeps you going, isn't it? But on the other hand, it can, if there's also lack of judgment with that fierce independence, it can be very, very difficult for family members to be able to provide the support that that person might need. Many of us think that we can go on forever doing the things that we can do. Hopefully, having been a carer for most of my adult life, I'm wise enough to know that accepting help, support, independent aids and adaptations is not a failure of the individual. It's just the reality of what we need to help us and our families cope in as we age. But yeah.
So what, in a nutshell, Janice, obviously I don't want to keep you up too late, it's 12.
No, that's
What
no
in a
problem.
nutshell, okay, that's good. What in a nutshell is your message to politicians? Because obviously we've in the early days of this campaign, before I talked to the candidates in this North Norfolk constituency and also to UKIP and to the Greens, whom we'll be hearing from in a short while, I asked our audience what they thought should be in effective. I can't call it a carers manifesto because someone else has taken the title. We've got the hashtag CWR manifesto. And a lot of that is about things like helping carers to try out perhaps new remedial type strategies so that you reduce the burden on the carer, to also financial regulation of care homes, to encouraging care homes to be more like a family rather than a business. I mean, those are the sorts of, and I touched on this with Peter Beresford earlier, that maybe the way things are looked at now is all too inhuman. To what extent would you go along with that, or disagree with it?
Oh no, I would agree with that. And there are quite often very small independent care homes who are family settings and just respect their residents and so forth. But of course, people don't even have tenure in care homes. If a person becomes difficult or their carer becomes too demanding of good standards, it's all too easy at the moment for that person to be moved out, shipped out, and said, no, we don't want you anymore. So, there are a whole range of issues that need to be resolved around that. Care workers, for example, aren't given the status or the pay that incredibly essential work demands. And you can't get this sort of thing on the cheap. You have to have respect for care workers and respect for carers. I think
Well, we've
that's
got some.
really part of it.
Let's just see how what you think of some of the comments in live
Hmm.
chat room. By the way, if you want to get in touch with us, email news@carersworldradio.com. Follow us on Twitter and direct messages, or join in the chat room. We've got some interesting comments here. If I could just see, Janice, what you think of them. Nesta says only carers know what carers need. Just look at our so-called supporting organisations who are run by non-carers. Well, any supporting organisation, of course, are not here to answer for themselves. Rosemary, a comment about the professionals. they listen but goes in one ear and out the other, they make noises but no real action. Obviously, we don't want to go into specific organisations, specific individuals, but what's your overall impression of the standard of care professionals and how much they really understand what a carer is going through, as we've discussed, say, in the last few minutes?
Yeah. A very mixed bag, a very mixed bag. I mean, you know, many of our professionals are carers themselves, so they wholly understand that. But of course, the bottom line is their budget, isn't it? The bottom line, resources. So even if they had the inclination to be very carer aware and carer friendly in their approach, the way things are, it's not set up, you know, to support them to do their jobs. I mean, if you've had 25% cut in your budget, that you can't get the resources to provide the support carers need, then, you know, some of that humanity goes out the window, because the carer in front of you is the resource. And that's what I'm saying. You know, if for example, the Tories said they would give a carer a year off work to be able to care, with the expectation that they would be able to go back into that same job, I would say dream on. What carer would actually have the resources to be able to take a year off work unpaid? You know, I've been part of a movement that said, no, let's support carers to be able to work, not expect them to give up work in order to care. You know, they're going to have lives later on. They're going to grow old and need resources. What's going to happen to them? It's just like the whole concept of the dementia tax. So many of our young people, there's no full picture. So many of our young people aren't on the property ladder. So this dementia tax is just a short-term fix. It's not going to be anything that's sustainable, because the next generation aren't going to have those resources, are they? They're not going to, if they're only going to be left 100,000 only. I mean, it sounds, you know,
Well, it's
I don't want
in
to
many respects,
dismiss
100,000 are
that,
not that
but
much these days.
100,000, and you
You
have,
know, that's what our audience is telling us anyway.
yeah, 3 adult children, you know, where's that money going to go? It's not going to go very far when you're going to have to try and buy a house or even afford rent these days. So, you know, I was really surprised that the Tories came out with the back of a fag packet, which is what Peter Beresford said, proposal, when I had always thought that this would be done with consideration and by an all-party group. You cannot do this sort of off-the-cuff proposal just for a manifesto.
Well, the proposed green paper considered in the autumn, or to be published in the autumn. So obviously we'll see what that. But just finally, over to the next year, what briefly that will give you hope for the future, as Beresford was talking about?
Oh well, it's got to be, you know, funding for our NHS and social care. I know there's quite a lot of drive towards integrated services, so a health and care service. But what we want is one that doesn't have a medical approach to things, so it really fully understands social care. I mean, just in Surrey, for example, one of the commissioning groups, the clinical commissioning groups, has entered into a partnership with Surrey County Council so that they can do assessments and so forth. Well, you know, we want properly trained people that understand carers, not, again, treat us like resources. And as to what's happened to our carer strategy, well, goodness knows now.
Well, we are on the hunt for that, and we are hoping to unearth what's gone to sometime in the next, 2 weeks, but I think I may be being a trifle optimistic. But for the moment, Janice Clark, thank you very much indeed. I'm sure we'll be talking again, and have a very good night's sleep probably after this, and we'll talk again. Indeed, for joining us on Carers World Radio Plus. Thank you, Janice.
Thank you.
That's Janice Clark, who's a carer from Surrey. You're listening to Carers World Radio Plus, broadcasting live at midnight 32 from the count in North, which is the North constituency, and as you can see behind me, lots of work, people beavering away at tables counting. All the boxes are now in, that's been confirmed to me, so it's just a matter, I say just a matter, a simple matter of adding everything up. So anyway, good to join us. Now, if you're just joining us, you're listening to Carers World Radio Plus, broadcasting from General Election 2017, looking at the carers' perspective on what you, the voters, have decided about the next government. You can email us on news@carersworldradio.com. You can follow us on Twitter and direct messages, or join in the chat room as you are now doing. So just to pick a comment up from Nesta, less carers needing a food bank would be a major, in capitals, victory. So, concentrating back again on the North Norfolk constituency, we've heard earlier from James Wild, the Conservative candidate, from Stephen Burke, and from Norman Lamb, the Liberal Democrat candidate, who's hoping to retain this seat with his majority 4,000 in 2015. UKIP have explained their reason for not putting up a candidate this time, and more about their general policies. And now it's the turn of the Green Party to explain why they're not standing on this particular occasion. And for that, I've been to Stuckwood, who's the Green candidate for Cambridge City. Here's what she had to say about that decision not to stand in Norfolk.
It's obviously very unfortunate. We know we've got the best policies and the best way of running the country, and we would love to stand candidates everywhere. But unfortunately, we do have a broken voting system in this country that means that we have to be sensible and grown up about working together to achieve the best for the country. And at this election, the idea of having a Tory majority dealing with things like Brexit and with NHS, with care services on the brink of collapse, is simply unthinkable. So we've taken the grown-up decision in a number of areas to work together with other parties to give us the best chance of overturning the Conservative government. In Norfolk particularly, where UKIP have stood down in favour of the Tories. We're by no means saying that we agree with the Liberal Democrats on everything, but we think that we have to unite behind certain candidates as the best way of keeping the Tories out. So all I'd say to all the Green supporters there is, we're very sorry that we weren't able to represent you, we are not able to fight that seat, but you need to make the decisions that are best for the country at this time.
Interestingly, perhaps UKIP have actually slightly changed their position. They now say, and have now told us on Carers World Radio Plus, that if Brexit is the key issue, then you should vote Tory. But if it's not, then you should vote for the Liberal Democrats.
Well, they're actually making almost a sensible point there, because this election isn't entirely about Brexit. I work for the NHS and I've worked in social care, and I could say that this election could be decisive for the NHS. I don't think the NHS and our care system will survive in its current form for another 5 years, surviving underfunding and through privatisation as well. So UKIP are quite right to point that out, and people should be weighing that on their minds when they're thinking about who they're voting for at this election.
Using your background in health and social care, what do you feel are the problems that need sorting out?
There are a number of huge problems. The first that needs to be sorted out is the issue of privatisation. Health and social care services are best run publicly. They're best run in the interests of patients, not in the interests of private shareholders or investors. And we need to make sure that ownership of all these services publicly remains, and all the privatisation that's taken part so far is rolled back. And the Liberal Democrat proposals of putting in another £6 billion a year are worthless unless that money gets to where it's needed, and we can't guarantee that as long as we've got a fragmented and privatised system. So we would start by reversing the privatisation of the NHS by implementing an NHS reinstatement bill that would make sure it's fully public. Then there is the significant issue of underfunding. NHS services across the country have been underfunded. In Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, we're looking at £500 million annually being taken out of the health economy here by 2021, which is completely ridiculous, because it can't happen without costing lives and without costing people the care and the dignity that they need. We also need to make sure that we support carers and those working within the system properly, and I'm talking about paid carers and also unpaid carers. Those who are working in carers positions, such as myself was a few years ago, they need more reward, because simply the wages aren't good enough and the training also isn't good enough. And we also need to recognise that unpaid carers make a huge contribution to our system and save the country billions of pounds by helping care for their relatives and their loved ones. And they need to be rewarded and looked after properly as well, because there's an unbearable strain on many of them at the moment.
Some of our audience are telling us that, in fact, what we should be seeing, rather than the many people applauding their efforts as unpaid carers, to actually say, let's pay carers, let's support them properly, let's train them properly. And their argument is that not only could they deliver really good care for the person they care for, but also save the state money. What would your view on that be?
I'd say absolutely. It's very frustrating that that care isn't recognised in that way, and that people aren't given the support they need to be able to look after their relatives. One of our flagship policies, something that no other party is talking about, is the idea of a universal basic income, which in the future could possibly be a way of rewarding those who have to do work which at the moment isn't recognised and isn't paid, to make sure that everyone has a basic salary to meet their needs, to get by on. And it means you could take time out of work and afford to do so to look after your relatives, because simply at the moment a lot of people can't afford to do it, and they're being placed on, under huge amounts of strain.
Labour are proposing in their manifesto working towards a national care service. UKIP speak about health and social care being pulled together effectively into a new government department. Do you believe that either of those proposals would help?
Essentially, the care system in recent decades has been privatised, so whereas councils and local authorities used to publicly provide care for people, that's increasingly moved into the private sector. And I don't think it's worked. The system isn't effective. A huge amount of care homes are closing because we're not funding them properly. I don't think I agree with either Labour or the UKIP's proposals, and certainly the Tory proposals of making it a lottery in terms of if you are unlucky enough to have dementia or Alzheimer's at the age of 60 or 65, you could lose everything to pay for that, and your family could lose the house that you grew up in, I think is a disgrace. What we should be saying is that we need a universal system whereby everyone who needs it can get access to good, dignified treatment, which can be funded through progressive general taxation, and those services should be funded publicly. In Scotland we have free personal care for the elderly. There's no reason it can't be done in England and Wales as well, but it does need to be funded properly. But there's a huge amount of untaxed wealth and other areas of taxation we can look at, such as property and financial transactions as well, that could be used to bring in the money to provide that universal system, and there's no reason why we can't do that.
So you would be in favour of spreading the risk amongst people as other parties are, apart from the Conservatives who say if you can afford it, you pay for it?
Certainly. I mean, things like I've already said, such as dementia or Alzheimer's, are a lottery. It's and the whole idea underpinning our National Health Service was that you wouldn't have to face those illnesses and those diseases yourself. That we would share the risk, we pay in together, and we make sure that whoever gets hit by a disease or an illness like that gets the support that they need. And that's also the most effective and cost-efficient way of doing it as well, because paying for it privately will cost a lot more, it will be more ineffective, huge amounts of money will disappear out to shareholders and private investors. If we have a national care service, bring these things in publicly, fund it through progressive general taxation, that's the most effective and definitely the most fair and caring way of providing that system.
And in terms of the welfare system, the principle that the Conservatives so far in government have adopted is that people should be assessed, and on the basis of that assessment they should be paid what is appropriate. How far do you go along with that?
I think the regime of forcing people to go to private assessors, private companies, to be assessed for employment support allowance, to be assessed for disability allowances, is definitely the wrong way to go about it. We should be trusting healthcare professionals, GPs and nurses who know their patients and will make decisions in the patient's interest, rather than private companies who are almost duty bound to try and get as many people onto lower levels of benefits or off benefits entirely. We in the Green Party would trust healthcare professionals to make those decisions. We would definitely make sure that there was an uproot in the rates of benefits being paid to people so they keep pace with inflation, because what we've seen recently is benefits and welfare being paid to people not keeping up with inflation, forcing more into poverty, and especially those with disabilities, making it more difficult for them to live independent lives, and it's very important that we rectify that situation.
Stuart Tuckwood from the Green Party standing in Catty on the reasons why I'm not standing in this constituency of North Norfolk, where the count is going on behind me. They've been busily at the tables here, working hard, and I'm reliably informed that in about 15 minutes or so we should have the turnout figure and be able to see whether that's better than, the same as, or worse than last year. Last year, we're having elections so often it feels like last year. In 2015 the turnout was just a tiny smidgen, that's a metric smidgen, below 72%. So good turnout last time. Let's see what it is this time. And the Lib Dems, as you know from what we've said before, if you're just joining us, this is a seat which the Liberal Democrats held in 2015, and in fact have held since 2001. They won it in 2001 with Norman Lamb, who's standing tonight in the hope of regaining his seat. Conservatives were in second place last time, UKIP third, Labour fourth, and the Greens last. There's a straight fight between Conservative, Labour and Liberal Democrats this evening. Just to give you a little idea, there's been, obviously on Carers World Radio Plus, we're talking health, social care, welfare, those types of issues. Just a word on Brexit. There's been much comment on the national coverage of the election about Brexit, but it's not really an issue that's come up with our audience, obviously with you, because it's not something that obviously health and social care issues are of greater concern. But interestingly, this is a constituency where in the Leave, they voted 59% in this seat to leave the EU. That was 3% higher than this region of East Anglia and 7% higher than the national average. It's in covering this constituency, I think it's fair to say that from what we've seen, that in fact it is health and social care issues that are paramount in that. And we'll be hearing a little later from the candidate for the Conservative, Stephen Burke for Labour, and Norman Lamb from the Lib Dems at a hustings that was held at Stalham Baptist Church earlier on this week. We're going to be dipping into a little bit of that, find out more about it. We're talking about finding out things to Carers World Radio Plus. We've got a little film for you on the road and a little bit of what we're about.
It's just another day for Carers World Radio, except that on this occasion, this one started at 6 a.m. and will provide television pictures to a world audience via the internet. It's the day of Carers UK 2014 Annual General Meeting.
All those in favour, please show. Any against?
It's held at a conference centre in the heart of London's business district, Canary Wharf, and each year Clifford Chance lend their facilities free of charge. Carers World Radio is the brainchild of Ron Critcher, who's anxiously organising this radio and TV event.
The computer keeps saying it's offline. Oh, I wonder if that was something significant.
Another person who waits with bated breath is Tom Magner, journalist and programme anchor.
It might have been flashing, but I'm not sure he's doing it.
He concentrates on the coming interviews and features. The morning schedule involves members of Carers UK, currently on the podium, but soon to be facing Tom in the studio.
I'm taking some time off from being a forensic scientist to be the other half of me, a broadcast journalist. I'm working for Carers World Radio, running a programme called Carers World Investigates at the Carers UK National Summit in London, in Canary Wharf, which is where I am now, and having a fascinating session this morning, hearing about the issues that carers face and the people they care for face. This afternoon, it's a chance to look in the political crystal ball and see what carers can expect from politicians in the run-up to and after the next general election.
It's now 10 o'clock and the Carers UK AGM has begun, and Carers World Radio will follow shortly. Ron is upbeat despite the technical obstacles that face him. But he's not on his own today because he's assisted by Natalie Gordon, who's completing her PhD at the London School of Economics, and Joe Harper, a graphic design student who's already worked on a number of carers projects.
I did graphics at A-levels in college, which is something I've always wanted to do as a career, but I've taken this path so far doing business administration qualification, but I've also done loads of other stuff with Ron. So I designed the Young Carer Strategy book, which is getting sent out soon.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to Carers World Investigates, this special edition coming from the Carers UK.
As cables and webcams jockey for position with the presenter, Carers World goes on air. Tom, in the studio, sets the scene, while Natalie and Joe field the chat room messages and update various social media sites.
And so, wherever you are, from Wakefield to Weston-super-Mare, the Shetlands to Shenfield, Austria to Australia, join us on carersworldradio.com. Have your say. You can email us on
This is the very essence of today's broadcasting, using a technology that was unheard of a decade or so ago, and a contemporary style so removed from traditional and, some might say, old-fashioned broadcasting.
And guest 4057 in the chat room at the moment, chatting away.
and I think we don't make it easy for people.
Ron, while vision mixing and sorting problems with radio mics, is busy planning the afternoon's guests. The Minister, Andrew Sellers MP, is now unavailable for interview, as he's required back at the House for a debate. Fortunately, the Right Honourable Paul Burstow MP, an old friend of Carers World, has agreed to put in an appearance. So too will other VIPs from the caring community.
Yeah, it's going okay. It's just really, really busy, just trying to keep everybody up to date with what's going on. Lots of action on the chat room as well, which is good. Yeah, it's just really, really busy.
Are you going to do this again?
Never in a million years. No, I will do. Every year I say I'm not doing it, and every year I do it. So the fact is that I will do it again, but at the moment I'll say never again. But yes, I'll be here next year anyway.
There's a lull at lunchtime when Carers UK adjourn for the break. This will mean Carers World will have to fill with pre-recorded material, interviews and specially shot video.
Are we ready next door? Because Ron's looking out there. I'm not sure what.
Do you want me to check?
Yeah, just check. Yeah. Because I want to come out of this immediately.
Lunch is over for Carers UK and the programme resumes with a lively debate in the auditorium, a battle almost between those on the podium and those in the audience. Tom will go into the meeting later with a digest of chatroom comments and questions. These will have been summarised during the lunch break by Natalie, who will be accompanying Tom to a front row seat, while acting as runner and producer for this item.
Well, welcome to carersworldradio.com. You're listening to live broadcasting from the Carers National UK Summit here at Canary Wharf in London. You're also listening to a special edition here in the studio as well. But now time on Carers World Investigates to turn to the subject of new technology. There are many different people, it seems, producing or using new technology to the better advantage of carers. And one of those people is Steve Peebles, Product Manager for Carers UK, joins me in the studio now. Welcome to the programme, Steve.
Hi.
Now, your app, or whatever it's called, Jointly, tell us a little bit about it, how it works.
Yeah, it's a mobile phone and web app called Jointly, and the idea behind it is it's to help coordinate care.
The AGM ends at 3:30, and most speakers will want to depart. Ron has to make sure that the right people are whisked into the studio for Tom's interviews at 4:15 that wrap up the day.
It's not just a generalised promise about social agendas, it's about specific, hard, difficult choices that we're prepared to make.
Paul Burstow MP and Channel 4 presenter Victoria MacDonald discuss issues with Tom, while in the control room next door, Ron expertly manages both sound and vision and prepares the closing titles for this 6-hour marathon.
A Liberal Democrat, and it's a coalition. You can't speak perhaps for the Conservatives.
Jostling for position and competing for funds, Carers World Radio may be a small fish in a large pond, but its impact and presence grows daily. Their broadcasts during the Carers UK 2014 AGM, not covered by any of the mainstream channels, claimed well over 500 viewers. Podcasts will raise that number into the thousands. What is certain is the Carers UK audience present in the Clifford Chance Auditorium was less than a tenth that of the Internet. Times, they are indeed a-changing.
Well, my thanks to the production team, my production team today, fantastic as ever. Ron Critcher, a technical genius at work, Tim Matthews, Joe Harper, Natalie Gordon's also helped us as well. And thank you so much to all of you in the chat room. You're listening to carersworldradio.com, radio with a purpose. Yeah.
Live and on YouTube, this is Carers World Radio Plus.
And you join us at the North Norfolk constituency count in the general election 2017. Carers World Radio Plus, featuring this particular constituency, a land of sharp contrasts. In it, the Liberal Democrat Lamb is aiming to try to keep his seat. And so there's quite a bit of excitement in the room and in the gap here above the room, because there's a feeling that this result could be close. But who knows? We shall see later on. But one thing we do know that's just been announced formally by the acting returning officer Stephen Blatch is the turnout to this election. And the turnout, I can now tell you, in North Norfolk constituency is 75.8%. That's 75.8%. Last year it was 71.96%. So that's more or less just under 4% up. So we shall see what impact that has on the result ultimately when there's a declaration. Now, one of the things that we've seen in the past few days is the hustings at Stalham, where the three candidates, James Wild for the Conservative, Stephen Burt for Labour and Norman Lamb for the Liberal Democrat, have been meeting in Neck. It's hosted by Stalham Baptist Church and the chairman is David Charles. We're going to dip into our first session now, so over to David.
James Wild, Conservative, yeah. Stephen Burt, Labour, and Norman Lamb, Liberal Democrat.
And there we are. That's an extract, the first extract from the hustings at Stalham Baptist Church. Earlier on this week, you heard Norman Lamb, the Liberal Democrat candidate, standing in this constituency, hoping to regain his seat. Currently has a majority of just over 4,000. Also, we heard Stephen Burt for Labour and James Wild for the Conservatives. You're listening to Carers World Radio Plus. We're at the count in the North Norfolk constituency. In case you're wondering where we are, we're in a sports hall at this night on a Thursday evening. This is 5 minutes past 1. Joining me now is Ed Maxfield, who is the election agent for Norman Lamb, Democrat candidate. Welcome to the programme. Ed, perhaps first of all, you start with basics. What is an election?
Well, an election at one level is just the person who does all the legal bits and bobs, signs all the forms, makes sure the candidate is properly nominated, and then records all the expenses during the campaign. And that's on one level what it is. But of course, really, I've got two jobs because I'm also the campaign manager, I suppose, and so I'm the one that's responsible for delivering the campaign locally in the constituency. And a very wise woman once told me many years ago that the definition of the role is that if you win an election, you had a great candidate, and if you lose an election, you had a bad campaign manager. So that's kind of the role in a nutshell.
Well, we'll see which you are later on this evening. This morning, as it happens. We've still got a potential 4 hours or so to go until the count's delivered.
Staying up late at night is another key part of it.
Oh yeah, yeah. To start with, can you go a night without sleep? If you can, you've got the job. But just try and give us a sense, if you would, of the constituency itself, because obviously people who live in North Norfolk and watching us now will be familiar with the territory, so to speak, but many of our listeners won't be. Just paint us a picture of North Norfolk.
So it's a very big rural constituency, half a dozen sort of medium-sized market towns and lots of villages. I mean, over 100 villages in total across the strip of the North Norfolk coast, really, sort of from the outskirts of Yarmouth over to the edges of King's Lynn.
So it's sort of long and thin.
Yeah, sort of banana shaped along the coast.
Resting sort of between Norwich and the coast,
yes,
sort of thing.
Yeah. So I mean, there's no kind of obvious centre, if you like. All of the roads sort of cut through and go into Norwich and head with just a major road going across it. So wherever you are in the constituency, you're probably 40 minutes driving time from somewhere else in the constituency.
It's one of the things that perhaps, I mean, we've seen, if people are also watching national coverage, they'll have seen at the beginning, I think it was Sunderland South and Newcastle Central rushing to try and get their count done first. I'm guessing that North Norfolk, with that sort of structure, you're not going to be rushing, because they've been telling me that their target was to get ballot boxes in by midnight, which they did do by 10 minutes to spare, as I understand it. So, so it's a logistical difficulty,
Yeah,
isn't it?
and it's very interesting watching as a kind of, as a sort of political nerd, if you like, watching the process tonight. Compared to last time in 2015 when we had council elections at the same time, which kind of lengthens the process.
Yeah.
But it's pretty apparent to me that deciding is to be careful rather than quick. The guys running the count, so you can see that they're doing it very carefully, very deliberately. There's a lot of boxes. We're very aware that the boxes that are first are the ones over this way, where the demographics might be slightly different to the western end of the constituency. So it's quite interesting watching it develop through the night.
So there was I hoping that maybe 5 a.m. They didn't really mean that. They actually meant 4 because council elections last time. Clearly, well, at the moment the counters are having a break, a well-earned break between the verification. So we know that the turnout now, as we've already discussed, 75.8%, almost 4% up. What's your thoughts on that? Do you feel more optimistic because the turnout's up, or does it really not make that much difference in this constituency?
I think it's a reflection, and actually probably where they're doing the count. It's a reflection of the fact that everyone knows that this is a key marginal contest this time. Both ourselves and the Conservatives have worked the campaign very, very hard here in North Norfolk, and that's, I'm sure, is what's driven the turnout up. With both parties, doing their very best.
What wants to deal with our world?
No, that we could be here a long time after 5 o'clock if there is a recount. But no, indeed. I was Norman's in 2001 when he was first elected, and his majority then was a bit under 500 votes.
Oh, so that's a lot closer than it stands at the moment.
Yeah, and it's and it looked at one stage as though it's going to be very much closer than that. And they did do a kind of a flip through that time round. It didn't take terribly long, and so you have to be very close for it to be worth doing a recount. But we'll wait and see.
So what is there any? I mean, obviously a lot's happened politically between 2001 and 2017. Not least Brexit, not least recession, world recession. How does it feel on the ground? What are the differences you feel, or perhaps similarities, between 2001 and 2017?
Well, I think so. We've been very clear that we've run on Norman's local record as a local MP. The polls were closed 3 hours ago. Whatever I say now isn't going to influence the way that people vote.
Absolutely. Well, that's why I'm allowed to talk to you now.
Absolutely. So that's very much the case. That's what we've done. But I think what's striking for me about this campaign is that there have been 2 really big national issues that have hugely influenced the campaign locally. One, inevitably, is Brexit. Is the Conservative announcement on social care funding, which had a huge impact in the constituency. I forget exactly where we rank in terms of the age profile of the constituency, but it's one of the oldest profile constituencies in the country, and lots of very worried people about the impact of those changes.
Well, it's I mean that's obviously been the subject that's concerned our audience most greatly. In fact, I don't think anybody in the first couple of weeks when we were seeking people's views to form effectively a carers manifesto, although I can't use that title because another organisation's got it and hasn't used it, but they've still got it. They got there first. But anyway, in our hashtag CWR manifesto, it's all about health and social care in some form or another, and particularly about a call for financial regulation of care homes, which and rights for residents of care homes. And I don't know whether that's a sort of political subject that's come across your radar.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's very apparent is that whatever you think of Norman Lamb as a politician, he's completely on top of that particular brief, having been care minister himself, and so he's able to talk with great authority about all of those issues. I see on a day-to-day basis issues coming into his constituency office as a constituency MP about the quality of care. And it's clear that is there's a sort of sense that's a growing concern. But I think this one, I mean, I said a couple of minutes ago that I'm a political nerd. I'm always conscious that most people
Not a bad thing if you're an agent.
well, indeed, yeah. Don't have the same level of engagement or interest in politics, most people. And so the extent to which they're going to engage with those really detailed issues and policies, it's going to be fairly fleeting, or it's going to be a relatively small number of people. But I think that one announcement, that one big thing, had a real impact on a lot of people. And I don't know, maybe we'll raise the profile of all the other issues in relation to care going forward.
Well, I mean, I raised with James Wild, the Conservative candidate, a particular point where social care, and again I can say this now because we're not influencing anybody, but it's in his interview, which I've already heard. Well, and the manifesto on page 3 said it is completely wrong, basically, to pass a debt on to future generations that you cannot pay yourself. But isn't that what the deferred idea of you paying the next generation is all about? But anyway, his reaction is there for all to see in the interview. But just so, obviously we're on national coverage as well, and you've probably already heard about the BBC exit poll suggesting there may be no overall majority, which may cause some of us to wonder why we ever had this election in the first place. But that's another story. But given also that locally UKIP Councillor Peter Reid came out and actually positively said Norman Lamb is a fantastic constituency MP, vote for him. What's your feeling at this stage about whether your candidate is likely to get back in or not?
I mean, there's a great phrase that politicians use about being quietly optimistic, isn't there? I'm sort of pleased with how the count's gone so far. It's you can never be entirely certain, and particularly with the size of the constituency, that what we're watching at the beginning may be different to what you get at the end. So, we're reasonably happy with the way things are going.
Okay. And just actually, there is a final question. I noticed earlier on, I've been noticing all the time downstairs, that when the counters are at their tables, as our viewers will have seen in the back, the reason it's a distant shot incident is it's hard to see any details of these ballot papers. Members. Now, there's an announcement coming through now, which I think might be a resumption of, or rather, the beginning of phase 2, which is the actual counting now that the votes have been verified and the turnout confirmed as 75.8%. They see people like you and your colleagues in other parties standing behind the counters, looking intently at the tables. And I mean, if I was a counter, I'd be thinking, no, I don't want you to see what I'm doing. Yeah. I'm sure there's a very serious purpose to this. So, just perhaps give us a clue as to what that is.
So I suppose we've got two jobs. So the teams of party workers that are here. Incidentally, when I say party workers, most of the people that are here are volunteers. So they're sort of giving up their night sleep for free.
For that we should be extremely grateful.
But I guess we've got two jobs. One is when they do that first stage that you referred to it quite correctly as the verification, where they're doing is checking to make sure that the number of ballot papers that they've got in each box matches the number that were issued at the polling station. And what we tend to do is to use that as an opportunity to get a flavour of how the result's going to go. And then when they do the next bit, which is, say, they're probably just about to start, where they tip all the ballot papers together, mix them up, and then start putting them into piles, our job becomes watching those piles to make sure that the votes go on the right pile, and just making sure that nothing gets misplaced. And going back to your very first question about the election agent, for me, which is whenever we get ballot papers that are not very clear about what people have intended from their vote, then the returning officer will call the agents over to decide between us whether or not a particular vote is for a particular candidate.
So it's the agents that assist in that decision, and not the candidates. So the candidates here are sort of like in a tense watching brief, I suppose. they're sort of one removed from the actual actual process. No, it's really interesting. And sorry, there's a final question. There's always one, because I mean, it's fascinating talking. You've given a really good insight into what's going on. There's a term, spoilt papers.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly is that?
So,
is it what it says it is?
So that's part of that is what I've just been describing about those ones that we sort of look at the end. A small number of people. I spotted a couple while I was looking at the ballot papers in the first stage, where people deliberately reject all, in this case, all three candidates, and so
so like a big wiggly line down,
sort of through them, or write some fruity verse on the ballot paper, as you occasionally get. Or,
excellent. Not a good place for poetry. No. But I mean, this sort of, you wonder why people, we can only speculate, why do people come and vote, come into the polling booth to do that? Well, it's easier just to not turn up.
Yeah, it's an opportunity, I guess, to express an opinion. Maybe also, I mean, one of the peculiarities, of course, about our system is that everything in media, Theresa May, Jeremy Corbyn, Tim Farron, when people turn up to the polling station, Norman Lamb and James Wales.
What? Well, someone actually said to me this morning, what they said, but how do I vote? Well, she actually Corbyn. Well, let's say, how do I vote for Theresa May, Jeremy Corbyn? And they hadn't understood that what they're actually voting for is the representative in their area of the party of which they're leading. So it's not American. It's not you vote for Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton.
No, it's a very common thing.
Interesting.
And that may well be part of the, that may account for some of the sport ballot papers too. But ultimately, people are, I guess I'd almost rather people turned up and expressed their protest that way than protested by staying at home.
Indeed. Okay. Well, look, thank you very much, Ed, for joining. Sit there before I let you go. I can see the papers are now starting to appear on the table, so we are now most definitely in phase 2. So let's pick up where we left off. You're listening to Carers World Radio Plus, and we were looking at the Stalham Baptist Church hustings with the three candidates, James Wild for the Conservative, Stephen Burke for Labour, and Norman Lamb for the Liberal Democrats. Let's pick up where we left off with the hustings.
Would you like to tell us what you know?
Yeah, good evening everyone. I care about North Norfolk. I grew up in North Horsham. I lived there until I was 18. This is where my family are from. It's the area that shaped my values and my characters. That's why I would be the MP for this area, to get a better deal than in the past. I care about opportunity. The opportunity for everyone to have a good education. Education set me up and gave me the opportunities I've taken in life. Everyone should have the right to a good school place. I care about people being able to get on, being able to afford your own home in the local area where you grew up, near your family and friends. I also care about looking after the older generation, particularly in this constituency. We face an ageing population. We're going to have a couple million more people over the next decade who are over 75 who need to be looked after. And also care about security, just picking up Stephen's point and events that we had over the weekend and last week. The last 3 years I've worked with the Defence Secretary Michael Fallon in London, advising him on national security threats every day from people in Syria and Iraq who want to create carnage on the streets of Western Europe as they have in France. They've inspired attacks here. That's what I care about, security and opportunity in this area.
Thank you.
Live and on YouTube, this is Carers World Radio Plus.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, New Zealand. It might be good afternoon. Good evening in the UK. You're listening to Carers World Radio Plus, our election coverage, the General Election 2017. We're here at the North Norfolk count, and you've been listening in this section of the programme to the hustings at Stalham Baptist earlier on this week, where the three candidates were present: James Wild for the Conservatives, Norman Lamb for the Lib Dems, and Stephen Burke for Labour. And we're indebted to North Norfolk News for that footage, and quite coincidentally, I happen to have the North editor of the Eastern Daily Press, or covering North Norfolk, Ali McGilvery, with me. Ali, just for people who are not familiar with North Norfolk, what are the sort of stories that people are concerned about here? Does it surprise you that national issues have overtaken? Because you think if people felt passionately enough about local issues that somehow broadband would beat Brexit.
Yeah, but saying that Brexit is such a big deal, we don't know exactly how it's going to affect people. People who aren't normally interested in politics are taking an interest this time around because they don't know exactly what it's going to mean to them. We've got many businesses in this part of the world that rely on migrant workers coming across here, and they don't know what that means for the future of their business. If those people can't travel to England in future, and this uncertainty going on for so long, it'll be interesting to see. Well, we see Labour are getting an early start tonight. It'll be interesting to see how it pans out. But early indications are that the Conservative Party might be paying for some of that uncertainty.
Well, I mean, to something, I know this is a particular concern to our viewers on Carers World Radio Plus social care issues. How much do you believe that the so-called tax has had an impact?
Yeah, I think Norman Lamb's obviously been very passionate on health issues, and the dementia tax is something he's obviously picked up on. It resonates with a lot of people in this part of the world. Lots of people retire to North Norfolk. They want it to be one of the best places in the country for people to retire to. And the threat, we've heard it during the hustings that lots of people in North Norfolk are a lot of cash tied up in their property, but they themselves might not have a lot of disposable income. So this is a real genuine worry for people in this part of the world, and it looks, we're hearing again tonight unofficially that those votes may be stacking up precisely because of this.
Well, it's interesting that there seemed to be a change of from UKIP, who are not standing this time and who've explained already on the programme, and for listeners just joining us, we'll have the opportunity later to hear what they had to say. But they went from saying virtually to their supporters, vote Tory, to saying, actually, if Brexit's a real issue, vote Tory, but Norman Lamb's a fantastic constituency MP, vote for him. And that was a bit of a shock. I mean, did you see any sort of change in the campaign as a result of that?
Well, UKIP announced quite early on that they wanted their supporters to back the Conservative Party, James Wilde, to unseat Norman Lamb. And they had 8,000, they polled over 8,000 votes last time around, which was a massive game changer when considering Norman Lamb only had around 4,000. So even if not all of those UKIP voters transferred the vote to the Tory party, the Tories were still going to get a massive boost from that. But there is the argument that Norman Lamb has been pushing that he is a local candidate, he's done so well, and that has, again, that's touched a lot of the voters more than I thought it would. Norman Lamb served the constituency for 16 years and has gone a long way to potentially retain that.
What was interesting was just sort of off the record to us, and I had even had a Conservative person saying, actually Norman Lamb's a fantastic MP. So I said, well, why are you all standing against him then? Because that's really the sort of, I suppose, the image people have of politicians, what they should be, just good in their constituencies, whatever party they are.
Well, the argument is that the Conservatives are going to win by a landslide. So why not have somebody like Norman Lamb there as the checks his Parliament? The difficulty is the Conservative team. It's all very well having a good MP, but what if he's a lone voice in Parliament, or certainly on the margins of Parliament? Does he have the backing even of the Lib Dem leader, Tim Farron's not visited this stage, but the Lib Dems are small in number?
Or perhaps he's thinking you ran a contest. But anyway, we'll leave that for wild speculation. Ali, thank you very much appreciated. Ali McGilvery is the North editor, responsible for the coverage of North Norfolk news for the Eastern Daily Press. Now let's resume watching the footage from the hustings at Stalham Baptist Church as we dip in now to section 4.
So it's great timing as our review of the Stalham Baptist Church hustings draws to a close. I'm now off down to the floor of the count to bring you our coverage of the result. It's 3:10 in the morning. That's just under 2 hours earlier than expected, as Acting Returning Officer Steve Blatch announces the winner.
And I do hereby declare that Norman Peter Lamb is duly elected as Member of Parliament for North Norfolk.
And it means an awful lot to me that the people of North Norfolk have kept faith in me to continue to serve as your Member of Parliament. It's an enormous honour to do this job, and I will continue to take it very seriously and to give it my all to seek to serve the people of this wonderful part of the world. Appreciation for the people of North Norfolk for showing faith in me, but I think it will be seen as a historic miscalculation. The theme of what I tried to say was about taking people for granted. So locally, I think many people, including the media, took people for granted. They assumed that 8,000 UKIP voters would switch to the Conservatives, but nationally there was this assumption that they would win with a big majority, and that, in effect, sort of arrogance leads to people becoming unstuck, and that's what's happened in a big way tonight. I'm always a glass half empty type of person in campaigns. I always fear the worst, but we were getting such a positive reaction from people, including people who were telling us that they'd always voted Conservative and that they were voting for me this time.
We've a lot to be pleased about with the campaign. Obviously we'd like to have won, but I think we've laid sure foundations to the future. We had an excellent candidate in James, local lad, come back to where his family come from, where a huge number of his family live. I think he's a lot to offer for this area.
We've had a great night across the whole country, and I think that's what we're looking to build on in the future. But also what tonight has proved in North Norfolk is that we have a substantial anti-Tory majority in this part of the world, and we, as the Labour Party, need to make sure that we gain more of that going forward in future elections.
What are your feelings on retaining your seat?
Thrilled, I mean, it means a lot, this one. It's perhaps the most special of all, because I knew I was under such pressure. A lot of people had written me off, and I was very determined to prove them wrong, and we've done it, so it's thrilled.
What do you believe this means for carers?
Well, look, I will continue to do what I can to make their voice heard in Parliament. It's an important, very important issue for me, and I will do what I can, working with carers groups, to make sure that they are not ignored.
That's Norman Lamb, the successful candidate holding his seat, for which he's been the MP since 2001. You can hear the sounds of people packing up for me tonight, so time for us to say goodbye here on Carers World Radio Plus. Thank you very much indeed for watching us, for joining in the chat room. Special thanks to Ron Critcher, my producer, who's worked technological miracles with internet which hasn't been good at the best of times. Thank you also to Ed and Sue from the North Norfolk District Council, who've been the press liaison for this event. They've been very helpful indeed. Thanks also to my guests, Peter Beresford, Janice Clark, Ali McGilvery and Ed Maxfield. We look forward to seeing you again very soon as we pick up the pieces after this general election and follow the issues that affect you as carers. You're listening to Carers World Radio Plus, reporting with a purpose.